Stanford law student was nearly prevented from graduating after the student proposed, or produced, I should say, a satirical flyer for an event that was meant to make fun of people like Josh Hawley and Ken Paxton over in the state of Texas. Now, this was a flyer that the student created, his name is Nicholas Wallace, in order to mock Republicans who contributed to what we saw in our nation's Capitol on January 6th, with insurrectionists storming the Capitol and causing all sorts of chaos and damage. Now, the Stanford University and the law school that the student goes to was not pleased once there were complaints about this. Now, let's give you the details. Stanford threatened to block the graduation of this third-year student, Nicholas Wallace, after he sent the satirical flyer to a listserv used for debate by classmates. The flyer was a parody listing for an event held by the Federalist Society, a conservative organization for lawyers with a chapter at this law school. Now, you know that it's satire because if you take a look at the flyer, the date for the event was January 6th. He put this out days after January 6th. And if you actually read what's in the flyer, it's just abundantly clear that it was meant as satire. So it says, please join the Stanford Federalist Society as we welcome Senator Joshua Hawley and Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton to discuss violent insurrection. Violent insurrection, also known as doing a coup, is a classical system of installing a government. Although widely believed to conflict in every way with the rule of law, violent insurrection can be an effective approach to upholding the principle of limited government. Like, it's just so obvious, Woz, that it's satire. But the Federalist Society at Stanford they were not pleased. They were not happy about this, and they asked to speak to the manager, and unfortunately the manager was about to oblige in blocking a student from graduating over a satirical flyer.
Yeah, this is just this is insane. You know, and the funny thing is, nobody's more butthurt and sensitive than these right-wing conservative cats, particularly on college campuses, because they're like, oh, we're this minority and people are so mean to us and nobody likes us because we suck at parties and nobody. And it's, you know, this is just how they behave on college campuses. But the craziest thing to me, and is the idea that this kid would get, you know, reprimanded for this. When I was in college, and I'll have you know, I knew a guy who did a beer bong out of a garden hose and ended up in the hospital for 2 weeks. Okay, he got to graduate. Regularly, I would go to parties and people would play this game called Edward 40 Hands, where you got 2 ounces of 40-ounce beers taped to your hands, and you were not allowed to take them off of your hands until both 40s were done. These kids got to graduate. This kid writes a snarky letter to the Stanford Law Students Federalist Society, and they threaten to take his freaking graduation privileges away. What is America coming to, Anna?
Well, America is coming to like grievance politics, complaints about cancel culture, while both sides engage in it pretty incessantly, right? And Republicans are no exception to that. So we saw what happened to Emily Wilder, a former reporter over at, or former employee over at the Associated Press. She had done some pro-Palestinian activism in her college years, and so conservatives at her school decided to complain about her to the Associated Press and get her fired. So there's one example, one recent example of Republicans engaging in the behavior that they pretend that they're against. You know, one other thing that I should note is that this led to the law school at Stanford finding themselves with egg on their face, because we're talking about a law school. And you would think that a law school would be fully aware of the First Amendment rights of their students. And so at first they wanted to block this student, Nicholas Wallace, from graduating. There was quite a bit of backlash as a result. And so they decided, you know, maybe we need to consult with lawyers about what to do about this. you guys are a law school, you should know better. So in March, by the way, I'm sorry, let's go to this graphic. So they found out through consulting with lawyers that in the state of California, where Stanford is located, there are, of course, even though Stanford is a private university, First Amendment protections for students. So this is satire. Satire is clearly protected under the First Amendment, and Stanford realized that they cannot block him or punish him for his satirical speech. So at the end of the day, luckily, because of the backlash, Wallace was not blocked from graduating, and that's the positive side of this story. But I do want to also note that the Stanford Federalist Society filed the complaint against the student at a fascinating time. So they did it fairly recently. So it happened in March. Remember that the flyer was published, the satirical flyer was published a few days after the riots happened in the Capitol. Why did they wait till March? Well, a formal complaint was filed against Wallace by a top Stanford Federalist Society officer, claiming that the piece of satire defamed the organization and caused harm to its members. Stanford subsequently launched this formal investigation, but Wallace believes that they decided to file this formal complaint in March as retaliation. In March, Wallace helped to plan a virtual event at which I spoke about the Federalist Society's many links to the insurrection. The Stanford chapter's officer filed the complaint several weeks later, at which point 2 months had passed since Wallace created that satirical flyer. So they just wanted to get rid of him. They just wanted to retaliate and punish him for drawing attention to something that United States lawmakers who were part of this very group, the Federalist Society, had contributed to. Right, which is lies about the general election, which led to people thinking that storming the Capitol to overthrow the results of the 2020 election was what they needed to do to be real patriots. I know that that's an embarrassing reality and truth for the Republican Party, but it is what it is.
Yeah, and like you mentioned at the top, I just kind of wish progressives would steer clear of this, quite frankly, it's reactionary behavior. There's no other way. At its core, canceling people is reactionary, right-wing, and conservative behavior. If you consider yourself to be progressive and enlightened, it shouldn't be the first thing that comes to mind is lock somebody up, is to take their job away, is to make sure they don't graduate, is to just be punitive in your reaction. I'll just never feel like that's how we should be comporting ourselves as people who purport to be, progressive and enlightened.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.